Exomologiste tokirio te agathos, hallelujah.
Otis ton neona to eleos aftu, hallelujah.
Right. So, I actually want to go to Amir. Where is Amir? Where is he?
I don't know, but yeah, I think it's somewhere.
Let's go and ask this guy a question. How you doing, you?
Good to see you.
How's life treating you?
Very busy. Yeah, doing a course in cybersecurity.
Oh wow! Is it going well?
It's quite hard, to be honest.
Yeah.
They're cramming in a lot of information.
Right.
So,
Bless. You're going to be a hacker then.
basically,
Yeah.
A white hacker.
Right. That's worrying, ladies and gentlemen. Quick
Wanna
question.
discuss a bit?
Yeah, it's one topic, yes. I debated Amir and he declined to answer a question, which is that the question was that Muslims obviously believe in one Quran, but the Hafs, the Warsh, the Duri, the different recitations of the Quran are different. So since they're different manuscripts, they're different texts, in what way are they the same? How are they the same if they are different?
I mean, one way to look at it is say the message or the meaning is the same.
Yeah.
So the message is one God, to believe in His Prophet, to believe in the life after death.
Yeah.
So
And-
all of them say the same thing.
Yeah, and on
that respect.
yes, and on the meta-narrative sense, I completely agree. Every Quran on the meta-narratives teaches the same thing. You know, the judgment, the angels.
By the way, meta-narrative.
Meta-narrative, it means the grand story, the big picture. But I'm sure you're aware that in the petite narratives that are contained within the different Qurans, in the minutiae details, there are differences. So I can't remember off the top of my head which one it is, but I know that there's a variant where one says, and they, referring to the prophets, fought in the way of Allah. And then another one says, they, meaning the prophets, died in the way of Allah. Now, obviously, we're not necessarily talking about the same group of people in that variant, you know, because not everyone who fights dies, and not everyone who dies fights. And so, whilst there might be some overlap between those two groups, there's also going to be people that fall outside of that overlap, which means that in that variant, you haven't got the Quran talking about the same group, and so it's a minutiae detail difference.
I agree, yeah.
Right.
But like you said, the meta-narrative.
I grant that. I grant that absolutely. That's unarguable, and I'd be foolish to try and argue differently. But my point to you is that if the unity is based on the meta-narrative, right, then that means that we can say that we're not dealing, that the argument about whether it's a singular Quran or different Qurans, multiple Qurans, it becomes a bit of a moot point. Because if we're saying that the unity is based on the meta-narrative and the differences are based on the particular differences between the meta-narrative, the minutiae details, then there's just as much a strong argument to say we have different Qurans as we are to say that there's one Quran. Do you see what I'm going with there? Do you see the kind of the argument that I'm making? So in other words, what I'm saying is it becomes a moot point to say that there's one Quran.
I mean, for me, it's not an issue. The meta-narrative is the same.
Yeah.
So those who recite it one way, it's not that they believe differently to those that are reciting it in another way.
Yeah.
So whether you read it as prophets being killed or prophets fighting, they still have the same belief.
They have the same meta-narrative belief.
Yeah, that there's one God.
Yeah, I've already conceded that because that's obviously true, right?
That's the important thing.
Right. And therefore, I'm sure you can appreciate, and I will come back to this, because obviously if you're reading the version of the Quran that says that they died, because you use the Quran as examples, you use it in fiqh, you know. If you're using the Quran that says that they died and you're using the Quran that says that they fought, you're going to draw different lessons from those verses, right? They'll have different fiqh implications, won't they? Because fighting and dying are not the same, and you and I both know that fiqh rests upon a 5-pence piece.
The example that you're referring to elsewhere in the Quran. So even though it may say that they fought instead of they died or they were killed, elsewhere in the Quran, like in Surah Nisa, verse 150 something, it says that they killed the Prophet. So even though it may say fought in one place, but elsewhere in the Quran it says that they were killed. Like they killed some of the Prophet.
Elsewhere in a different Quran, not the same Quran.
No, in the same Quran, it's a different surah or a different chapter, Surah 4, verse 150 something.
What does it say?
It says that they killed the prophets.
Right, that they killed the prophets.
It's in context to do with the crucifixion.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that. I don't. Yes. No. I'm happy to go with your argument. But in terms of that they killed the prophets, right? We'd have to look up to see if that has any variance in different Qurans. Because remember, we are talking about.
I don't think that one does. But
Yeah. But in terms of the and this defense is something that Christians use when Muslims like yourself, because you come to Christians, we've seen you in video, you come to Christians and you say this Bible says this and this Bible says that. And when we point out that okay, but the beliefs are the same, you continue to prosecute the argument. So would it be fair?
I do believe the New Testament also has a meta-narrative, which is the death and resurrection of Jesus.
And that is consistent in all translations of the Bible, all versions of the Bible, all manuscripts of the Gospels.
Protestant canon. Or
Yeah, exactly, because we believe in the same 27 books. You see, if you're willing to accept that variations between texts of the New Testament doesn't destroy the meta-narrative of the New Testament.
Yeah, I think generally the New Testament will preserve. So what we have is the message of what the writers wrote.
And do you appreciate that for us, that's the important thing?
Yeah,
because when,
Christians are not inerrantists.
Yes, and also when you look at how the apostles quote the Old Testament, they're not perfickety about. They're not perfickety about wordings.
Like the church fathers as well.
Also the church fathers. So it's not part of our religion to be very perfickety about word preservation.
I also believe that in the case of the Quran, in the time of the Prophet as well, like he wasn't so picky. People have to recite it in the same way.
Right.
The main thing was the message.
But you're going to base that on hadiths, right? Where two people come to the Prophet and say, I heard him recite it this way, I grabbed him by the throat, and then he said he heard it from you, and then I brought him to you. Is that the hadith you're thinking of?
Okay,
right.
That's one example.
I put it to you, bro, and forgive me, I forgot your name, I am sorry.
Naz.
I put it to you, Naz, that hadith is a post hoc hadith to rationalize what Muslims were encountering later after Muhammad's death. Because we already know that the Quran that was around at Muhammad's time was bigger than the Quran that you have today. Right? You know, there's that hadith where it says, and we used to recite Surah, I think it's Barakah.
Or with stoning.
Well, there is that as well. That's a different one than the one I'm thinking of. No, it's where they talk about another surah and then say it used to be equal in length to Surah 2.
I don't know that.
You know, but now it's not. Right? And then obviously you got the stoning verse as well, where it used to be in God's book, but now it isn't.
I believe it's speaking about the Torah. Like Moses, because it's in the Hadith, it says the Book of Allah. So that doesn't necessarily mean the Quran. It could also mean the Torah as well.
Well, it could mean the Torah, except that lots of Muslims right now are distancing themselves from the idea that when the Quran says the book, it's referring to the Torah, because of the Islamic dilemma, you know. Are you aware of the Islamic dilemma? So lots of Muslims right now, I don't know if you're one of them, are distancing themselves that the identification of the Book of Allah is the Torah. Is that what you're saying?
It depends on the context. So Book of Allah can be Quran.
But this is an exegetical argument. It's more likely that it's talking about the Quran than it is about the Torah.
About the stoning?
Yeah, much more likely. Why? Because when you look at the hadiths and you look at how, when it talks about the Book of Allah, across the genre of hadith, invariably that term is used to refer to the Quran.
Always.
Well, I mean, you'd have to show me evidences where the words Book of Allah are referring to the Torah.
When it comes to the punishment of adultery in the Quran, it mentions a different punishment.
Yes,
than
whipping.
What the Hadith does.
Yeah.
So if you take the Hadith to be authentic, then the way some Muslims will reconcile it to say that this was speaking about the previous scriptures,
Yeah.
and now it's been abrogated in the Quran
Yeah.
with lashing.
Yeah.
and stoning.
Yeah, right. But the thing is, in that same hadith, the man says, "I am worried that future generations will stop doing, what was prescribed in that was prescribed in God's book." Because Muhammad used to do it, and we used to do it after him. And also, you've got the fact that, despite what you've just said, Muslim schools of fiqh continue to do stoning. And so I think for those reasons,
Abu Hanifa, so I follow the Hanafi school.
right?
So Abu Hanifa is the founder of the
Yeah.
Hanafi school. So he was of the opinion that there is no stoning.
But the Hanbali still stone,
Yes, I disagree with those.
right?
Yeah.
So I mean that opens up another possible problem, which
So
is
a lot of this is based upon ahad.
right. But
narration,
right. So
single
yes,
narration.
yeah. So but this draws out.
Mutawatir.
Yes. Yeah. But this draws out, another problem, and I don't want to get onto different problems.
You said you wanted to speak about one topic.
Yeah, I want to speak about one topic. So I'm going to shelve the fact that you've got this massive problem of different fiqh for different laws that massively contradict one another on the same
Not to do
topic.
with belief or salvation,
Yeah.
it's just more to do with practice.
Well, I know
But it's
because
so important, I agree.
no, it's really important because remember the Quran
Life and
says.
death, basically.
Well, the Quran says that on this day I've perfected your religion for you, right? Right, and completed my favor upon you. And the thing that the Tasfiyahs say about that verse is it's about what is haram and what's halal. And so when you've got a madhabs massively disagreeing on whether you stone someone or not, about whether it's halal or haram, that's a pretty big deal when the Quran says the religion's perfected. But let's park that.
Principles, well, anyway.
Yeah, let's park that. The point I'm making from the hadiths, from the two that I cited, is that the Quran of Muhammad is not the Quran of today. I'm willing to go along with it's largely the Quran that we have today, but it's not identical to the Quran that we have today, and that we have multiple versions of the Quran that in minutiae details disagree. So for example, going back to lashing and stoning, the Quran's very clear, it's lashing. Very clear. You can only get one feet from lashing. But when the Quran states they died or they fought, or rather, you should release a slave, as one version of the Quran says, when you do a certain kind of sin. I forget what it is. I think it's about fasting. And then another qira'ah of the Quran says you should release slaves, plural. Well, that really impacts your fiqh, because to make amends for missing fasting, should you release one slave or should you release two slaves? It has a big impact.
It's still the same. It's to do with the number of days that you miss fast.
Yeah.
So whether it's one day or whether it's more than one will depend on, like, you know.
Well, no, because one version of the Quran says release slaves, plural, which at minimum means two, and one version of the Quran, I think it's the Hafs, says slave, singular. Now, if you're recompensing to God something that you owe to God because you didn't fast, and God says release one slave, or He says release two slaves, it really does matter whether you release one or two, doesn't it? Because if you're releasing one when you should be releasing two, then you're not fulfilling the criteria.
If you take the singular recitation,
Yeah.
then grammatically singular can also be plural in meaning. It just depends on the context. So the message is that for atonement for missing a fast can be done by freeing a slave.
Yeah,
So
but
if you've missed like 2 days, then it's 2 slaves.
but this is that go on, Naz, I'll let you finish. Sorry.
No, I'm just thinking of, I need to see the verse as well.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying to that effect.
Yeah,
From the top of my head.
to be fair, I wasn't quite thinking that I was going to get into this conversation today, but so I've not gotten with it.
Let's just stick to the same topic.
But no, I mean, no, this is on the same topic. But next week, if you want, I'll bring it and we can discuss it in more detail. Because my point is, if Allah gives a command that says free a slave for missing fasting days, in one version of the Quran, but another version of the Quran says release slaves, plural, then that really matters about fiqh, because if Allah meant to say plural, but you read singular and you do singular, you're actually breaking the Sharia. You're breaking what God expects. So these variations, whilst I concede that the meta-narrative is the same, because Islam is a legalistic religion, these minutiae details really do matter, and this is a matter of fiqh. You know, you're going to come up with different fiqh based upon this contradictory reading.
I believe it's a contradiction. I believe the message is still the same. It's to do with the number of days you missed the fast. So even if you take it as singular, it's to do with how many. The meaning is plural.
Right.
Grammatically.
If I was in a court of law and I said I saw a man running off with that guy's Quran, but then another witness came up and said I saw men running off with that guy's Quran, have I made the same statement? Are those two statements the same?
No.
Right. So that means, Naz, they're not saying the same.
There is a way you could reconcile them.
Yes, by fiqh.
By saying like one time you were just speaking about the leader, so you used the man, but then it doesn't mean he was alone. He could have accomplished it.
Yes. Yeah, and so what we've got there is that once you've got these two variations of the Quran, you need then Muslims to step in and mediate the contradictions between the texts, you know? Like they've got to mediate it, you know? And
I don't see this one as a contradiction. If you've got something else that you think is better.
Well, I think
that's
the Quran. And what I always love about you, Naz, is, you know, you terrify me because secretly, like, you're a dark horse, bro. Like, a man who's learning to hack people's computers, you know, worries me greatly. But
it's for protecting security, like national security.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping to work with like GCHQ and stuff.
Really? Okay. But what I always appreciate you is the respectful way you engage in debate. You know.
That's the main thing. We don't have to agree, but just try to understand one another's perspective.
Yeah. But I would say that one of the ways that this is different between Christianity and Islam is that in Christianity, if there are differences in manuscript A, manuscript B, like the Comma Johannan, the Pericope Adulterae, you see, I don't even need to explain these to you, you know what they are, which tells me you use these arguments in the corner. But
I don't come here for arguing for the
I know, you discuss, that's fair. Yeah, absolutely, that is fair. But when we encounter these things, they're not as fundamental to our faith because for us it's the revelation precedes the wording.
It's the death and resurrection of Jesus.
You got it. But when it comes to the text of the Quran, the revelation and the wording are the same. They're synonymous, right? So our revelation precedes our wording.
You're saying that Jesus is the revelation.
Yes, and the Bible is an account. It is an inspired account of the revelation of the Son. Because in Hebrews chapter 1, as I'm sure you know, it says, in former days God spoke to us by prophets, but in these latter days He has spoken to us by His Son, the Word. Right? Now, in Islam, you have a synonymity between the wording of the Quran and the revelation, i.e. the revelation is the Quran is the revelation. And so when we encounter textual differences in the accounts about Jesus, yeah, it's a complicated issue, it's an important issue, it leaves people scratching their heads, and it makes differences on minor things, like whether we can pick up snakes, whether maybe we should or shouldn't be picking up snakes, but it doesn't make a big difference to the meta-narrative. In terms of Islam, the meta-narrative is that there is one Quran perfectly preserved. And I put it to you, Nassim, that these different Qurans are evidence that the preservation of the Quran has failed, and I can even provide for you a model by which these variations emerged within normal human understanding. Right? So first, I don't want to keep continuing and lecturing, I want to let you reply.
We conclude. You can conclude.
Okay, I concluded this. When we look at the variations of the Quranic text, the Qiraat, if we imagine what might happen when you take a consonantal set text that's rubric and formative, and then later insert vowels, but in a non-conformed way, we would expect to find exactly what we see in the Qur'an today. The first point to this argument is there isn't just 7 Qur'ats. That's just what Muslims say. Yeah, I don't know how many Qur'at do you believe in? Do you have a number?
I believe you can get multiple Qur'ans, like you can mix and match, and from that you can get many Qur'ans.
Right, so the number is indefinitive, exponential.
Yeah, it can be.
Yeah, so it's an exponential number, right? So if we imagine what would happen if you took a consonantal text and then in ununiformed, uncoordinated way had different people inserting the vowels, we would expect to see exponential differences, but restrained within a grammatical uniform manner because of the variations that consonants allow you to create. And that is exactly what we find in the Quran. We see the potentially exponential variations of Qurans. And that shows to me, that indicates to me that these variations are emergent from well-meaning humans rather than any act of God. Do you want to reply to... That's the summary of the argument.
In general, in principle, I agree with you. So I don't believe they're like multiple Qurans. I believe they were taught by the Prophet himself, that the Prophet allowed people to recite the Quran differently. But the important thing was the message, not that people recite the Quran in the exact same style. But then afterwards, after the Prophet passed away, then the doors were closed about reciting it differently. And then Muslims were concerned about that people, that there is some unity of
I'm glad we agree. I'm glad we agree. You know, something's changed in this corner, because you're the second Muslim today that's gone along with the idea that there's variant versions of the Quran.
The thing is that we also discussed the different messages of Islam. What does Islam teach and what does Christianity teach as well?
I'd love to have that conversation with you, Naz. You're the one person in this corner that I'd love to have a proper... Well, I'd love to have a debate with you because you know how to have a debate. You know, it's a pleasure speaking with you. Wait, don't go away. You know I always give a gift. I know I don't have to, and you've probably got far more academic books on your shelves, but I just want to give you a gift because you know that's just what I do. So let me give a gift to you, please. There's no point giving you a gospel, is there? You're going to have tons of them. There you go.
Well, if it's from you, I can take it.
Yeah.
Have more meaning to it. So.
Thank you so much. You look after yourself.
I appreciate it. I'll read it.
God bless. You take care. God bless, man. So, something's changed in this park. What's happening? Like, that's 2 Muslims in a row that have admitted there's different Qurans. Like, do you all remember the days of J. Smith and Hatun Tash when Muslims used to argue ferociously that there's only one, God bless you, Sam, that there's only one Quran? Yeah, that there's only one Quran. Well, look what's happened today. We've had 2 Muslims back to back admit that Christians are right, that there are different Qurans. Now, the point is, let me just explain how this works. Take any book you want, take the Bible, remove all the vowels from the page of continuous text. Then go away for a month and forget which passage of the Bible you've taken all the vowels away. Then come back and insert the vowels again. Now, because of the rules are that 1, every sentence you make must make sense, and 2, every word that you write must be grammatically correct, and every sentence grammatically correct. Now, for the most part, what you're going to find is that you insert the right vowels back into the text. But there will be occasions where the text itself allows you to have different words inserted that would follow the rule of making sense and being grammatical. That is what happens with the Qiraat of the Quran, because the Kufic script of the Quran is consonantal. Muslims later inserted vowels. The rules of speech mean that you can only insert certain vowels when you see certain consonants. But occasionally there'll be words where you can legitimately insert different vowels and have different words. And that's what we see in the Quran. And as Naz just said, the variations, I hope you're listening, Chris, at Speaker's Corner, the variations of Qiraat are potentially exponential because you can mix and match different Qiraat. In other words, there's no upper limit. There's not just 7, there's not just 10, there's not just 31. There could be as many as 100,000 different versions of the Quran, and Muslims cannot know which one was uttered from the mouth of Muhammad. Thank you very much. Islam is done, ladies and gentlemen.